She was sitting on his front step when Caleb Mears came down from the north pasture. 14 years old, maybe 15. Skinny in a way that meant she had not eaten yesterday. A canvas sack beside her that held everything she owned in the world, which did not amount to much. She sat with her shoulders drawn in and her hands folded, trying to take up as little room as possible, as if she had been taught by long practice that she was not permitted to take up any. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We love knowing who is with us by the fire. Caleb stopped his horse 30 yards from the cabin. The gelding had thrown a shoe on the trail, and Caleb had walked the last mile, which was why the girl had not heard him coming. He sat for a moment in the saddle and looked at her. He had buried his wife 6 winters ago. He had buried his boy the winter after. He had told the foreman at the Lazy K that he was hiring no one this season and that he was running light, and that anyone who came up the drive had best keep going, because he did not want company. The girl looked up. She had dark eyes and a long face and the kind of calm you only see in children who have already survived more than they should have to. She said, "They told me at the depot you would take me in." Caleb did not ask who they were. He knew who they were. He had heard the talk in town about the orphan girl the mission families had been passing between them since she was 4, the girl nobody kept, the girl who ate too much and asked too many questions and slept too lightly and was too much trouble for any household that already had its own troubles. He said, "I did not send for you." She said, "No, sir." He said, "I do not need a girl." She said, "No, sir. But you do not have anyone either." My aunt said that. It was true, and he did not like hearing it said aloud. He swung down from the saddle and took the bag at her feet and carried it inside without another word. He set a plate of cold beans and bread on the table. He poured water into a cup because he did not own coffee. He said, "You sleep in the room at the back. You do not go into my room. We will see." She did not say thank you. She did not cry. She did exactly as she was told. That first night, Caleb lay awake listening for her in case she stole something and left before dawn. She did not steal anything. She did not leave. In the morning, he found that she had taken the broom to the kitchen floor without being asked. That was how Nora Holloway came to live at the Mears place on the North Fork of the Canadian in the spring of 1883. For 3 weeks, Caleb spoke to her only when he had to. He told her to feed the chickens. He told her to mend the tear in her own shirt. He told her to stay out of the way of the horses. He was polite in the way that people are polite when they are trying very hard not to attach themselves to anything that might be taken away. Nora did not push. She did not chatter. She read the books on the shelf by sound of the letters, and one of them she figured out, and that was the one about a girl who rode with the cavalry. She kept that book under her pillow. In the 4th week, Caleb was roping a young steer in the front corral to brand it, and the steer broke left, and the rope missed, and the steer ran for the gate. Nora, who had been watching from behind the post, stepped into the lane and raised her arms. The steer turned. Caleb threw again. The rope sang, and the steer went down clean. He looked at her over the back of the animal. He said, "You flinched at the right time." She said, "I read about it." He said, "In books?" She said, "In the cavalry one." He did not smile, but something behind his eyes moved. He said, "Come here." He handed her the rope. He showed her how to swing the loop small first, then wide. He showed her where to plant her feet. He showed her how to read the animal's eyes before the animal moved. He told her, most of roping is not the loop. It is the reed. If you read right, the loop will land because it has to. That was the beginning of it. By midsummer, Nora could throw a clean loop on a moving yearling at 15 paces. By autumn, she could heel a running steer in the dark, which is something even grown men in that country had trouble doing, because you have to throw backward over your shoulder without looking while keeping your seat on a bad horse. Caleb watched her do it one evening at dusk, and he sat for a long time on the fence. He said, "You have got the gift, child." She said, "No, sir. I just had a teacher." He did not correct her. He did not need to. He had been a poor hand himself as a young man, until an old drover named Whiskey Jim had taken him on and showed him the patience of the rope. He had never been the best roper on the range. He had been good enough. He had been honest, which in that country counted for more. Now, watching Nora, he saw the thing he had never been. He thought about it and did not say it. He thought, this child is going to be the best hand on this ranch, and probably the best hand in the county, and the world is not going to know what to do with that, because she is a girl, and she is small, and she has nothing behind her name. The valley where Caleb ran his cattle sat between two bigger spreads. To the south was the Cross Y, owned by Lyle Brackett, who had come out from Missouri in '78 with money and a kind of smile that citizens trusted. To the east was the Bar R, run by a widow named Hetty Lamb who was honest and tired and losing ground to Lyle year by year. The country was open range and good grass, and the water ran deep under the North Fork, which was why Lyle had his eye on it. What would you have done in her place if you were a girl with nothing, learning a skill no one expected you to need? Would you have kept your head down? Or would you have let the rope sing the way it wanted to sing? Lyle sent his foreman around in June. The foreman was a tall man named Pike with pale eyes and a way of laughing that sounded like a door opening the wrong way. He brought a paper for Caleb to sign. The paper gave the Cross Y first right to any of the Mears water in dry years, in exchange for $300 and a stallion Caleb did not want. Caleb said, "I will think on it." Pike said, "Do not think long, Mears." Lyle is the kind of man who likes his answers quick. Caleb did not sign. He told Nora nothing about it. He went to town and talked to Judge Wickham about whether the paper was even legal. The judge told him it was legal in the way most things were legal out here, which was to say Lyle had 3 lawyers and Caleb had none. That autumn, Lyle came himself. He came with a wagon of flour and coffee and 2 sacks of seed corn, which was how he bought ranches without using money. He sat at Caleb's table. He was a soft-looking man of 50, with gray side whiskers and soft hands, and he spoke the way rich men always spoke to poor men, which was kindly and slowly, as if the poor man were a child. He said, "I hear you have taken on a girl." Caleb said, "I have." Lyle said, "That is a kindness." Caleb said, "It is my own business." Lyle smiled. He said, "I will not fret you, Caleb. I will only say that a man alone on a place this size is one bad winter away from poverty. I will be a friend. When my boys are working the South Line in spring, I will send one to help you mend fence. When brandings come, I will send 2. A man ought to have help," he said, "and I will say no more about the water." He said no more about the water. He did not need to. He had said everything he meant to say, which was that he would be patient, and that Caleb was welcome to refuse, and that the refusal would be remembered. After Lyle left, Nora came out of the back room. She had been behind the door the whole time. She said, "He smells like lilac water." Caleb said, "That is what money smells like, child." She said, "He lies." Caleb looked at her a long moment. He said, "Yes, he does. And he is also strong enough to take everything I own without lying once. That is the trouble with men like Lyle. They do not have to lie. They only have to wait." Nora said, "Then we do not wait." He said, "We do not wait for what?" She said, "For him to come back. We make ourselves the kind of place nobody can push around." He studied her. He thought about the girl on the cavalry book, the one who rode with the regiment. He thought about Whiskey Jim, who had been patient with him. He thought about his wife, who had told him on the last night he saw her alive that he had more in him than he ever used. He stood up from the table and put on his coat. He said, "Get your rope." That winter was a hard one. The snow came early and the cattle drifted south toward the breaks of the Canadian, and the men who had always helped Caleb did not come, because Lyle had quietly hired them for the Cross Y at twice what Caleb could pay. Caleb and Nora ran the ranch themselves. They fed the weak cattle with sacked cottonseed cake that Caleb bought from the mercantile on credit. They broke ice on the trough every morning before breakfast. They doctored a cow with milk fever in the middle of the night by lantern light, and Nora held the lantern steady while Caleb worked, and after that neither of them mentioned that they had saved the animal, because neither of them thought saving an animal needed mentioning. In February, 2 of Lyle's riders came through the north pasture at night. They cut 4 strands of fence. In the morning, 200 head of the Mears cattle had walked north onto the open range, and the men who were supposed to be watching the line were nowhere to be found. Caleb found the cut wire. He found the hoof prints of 2 horses that had not been shod like any other horses on the range. He did not say it was Lyle. He knew it was Lyle. He could not prove it was Lyle. That was how it worked. He sat at the kitchen table that night, and Nora sat across from him. She said, "If we lose the cattle, we lose the place." He said, "Yes," she said, "and if we lose the place, you will have to take his paper." He said, "Yes." She looked down at her hands. She said, "What if I go to town and enter the spring roping at the cattleman's meet?" He said, "They will not let a girl in." She said, "Then they will have to tell me no to my face." He looked at her. He thought about the cavalry book. He thought about Whiskey Jim. He thought about the long way his boy would have been if his boy had lived. He had not let himself think about that for 6 years. He said, "If you want it, you will have to earn it. We will work." She said, "Then we will work." They worked every day that March. They worked the calves in the south lot until she could heel a yearling in 3 seconds flat. They worked the practice steers Caleb borrowed from Hetty Lamb, who was bitter about the cross Y and glad to lend the animals and gladder still that someone was finally doing something about it. They practiced until Nora's hands were raw and Caleb's back was hunched over like an old man's. They did not speak of quitting because neither of them was the kind of person who quit. Then, on the second Tuesday of April, Nora rode into town behind Caleb, with her rope coiled at the saddle horn and her hair tied back in a leather string. The cattleman's meet was held in a corral behind the mercantile. There were 40 men there, mostly from the Cross Y, with 2 from the Bar R and 1 from a place down on the Washita. Lyle was there, on a wagon seat, with his hands folded across his belly and his soft smile in place. Pike was beside him with the pale eyes and the wrong-way laugh. When Nora rode through the gate, every man in the corral turned. There was a moment of silence that did not feel like silence. It felt like a held breath. Lyle said, "Caleb, is this a joke?" Caleb said, "It is my hand." A man in the back said, "It is a girl." Caleb said, "It is the best hand I have. If your meat is open to hands, she is here as a hand. If your meat is not open to hands, then it is not a meat. It is a club." And I think the judge in town would be interested to hear about that. There was a long pause. Pike looked at Lyle. Lyle did not move. After a while he said, very softly, very kindly, "Let her rope." They set a steer in the lane. The steer was a long, heavy yearling that had not been thrown before. The man who released it was one of Lyle's. He released it late, which is the kind of thing that respectable men do not notice and that everybody notices. Nora watched the steer come out of the chute. She did not move for 3 full seconds. Then she wheeled her pony. She threw the loop small and tight and clean, and it settled over the steer's head on the first cast. And before the steer had taken 4 strides, she had her dallies and was backing the pony and setting the rope. She dismounted in one motion. She ran to the steer. She flanked it. She tied the hind legs with a knot she had tied 10,000 times in the practice lot. The whole thing took 11 seconds. The corral was silent for a long beat. Then Hetty Lamb, who had come up from the bar in a clean dress and a hat with a green ribbon, started to clap, and after her, 2 of the men from the Washita, and after them, the judge himself, and after him, a few more, and after a while the whole meet was clapping for a girl nobody had thought to clap for, because she had done in 11 seconds what grown men were there to admire doing in 25, and she had done it on a borrowed pony, with a borrowed rope, on her first cast, without flinching. Lyle sat on his wagon seat and did not move. He looked at Nora a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, to Pike, "Find out who that pony belongs to." Pike said, "It is mine." Lyle said, "Then buy it back." After the meet, the men who had not spoken to Caleb in a year came up and shook his hand. They were not kind about it. They were embarrassed, which is the next best thing. They asked him to winter his cattle with the Bar R. They asked him to come brand at the South Camp. They invited him to sit on the Cattlemen's Association board, which was the very board Lyle had been quietly emptying of independent men for 3 years. Lyle drove his wagon back to the Cross Y without speaking on the road. He did not ride to Caleb's place again that season. He did not send another paper. What he did not know, and would not know for many years, was that Nora had asked Caleb not to sign the paper not because she was brave, but because she had spent the previous 2 winters being passed between households like a piece of furniture nobody quite wanted, and that this time, when the houses began to shake, she had decided that whichever house she was in was going to be the house that stood. In the year that came, she became, by the quiet agreement of every man who had seen her rope in that meet, the best hand on the Mears place, which was the best hand in that corner of the country, which was a long way to come for a child who had shown up on a cabin step with a bag and nothing else. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep going. The summer after the meet, Caleb began to talk to Nora. Not as a man talks to a child he is humoring. As a man talks to another person whose company he has chosen. He told her about his boy, the one they had buried, who had been the kind of boy who liked the sound of the wind in the wire and the way a candle looked 3 seconds before it went out. He told her he had not let himself say any of this for 6 years, because he had been afraid that saying it would make it more true. He told her she had not made it less true. She had made it possible to be in the same room with the truth. Nora sat on the porch that evening and braided her hair, and she said, almost to herself, "It is strange how the things you have given up on tend to find you when you stop hunting them." Caleb did not answer. There was nothing to add to that. He went into the kitchen and came back with a small tin cup and a bottle of whiskey he had been saving since his boy's birthday. He poured a measure for himself and an equal measure for her, which was the way in his country that a man told a child she was no longer a child in his house. Nora held her cup and did not drink it. She held it. That was enough. Caleb drank his and looked out at the dark. He said, "I will not let this place go." She said, "Neither will I." He said, "Then we have a pact." She said, "Then we have a pact." The next spring, when Lyle rode out to the Crossway gather, 3 of the men who had been his came back and asked Caleb for work. Caleb did not pay what Lyle paid. He paid what he could pay, and he paid it in cash in a brown envelope on Saturday afternoon, and he called every man by his name. By the end of that year, the Mears place was the place in the valley other men stopped by on their way home from work, and they sat on the porch, and Nora passed them sweet tea, and the men told their stories, and she listened in a way that made them feel as if their stories had been worth telling, because they had been worth telling, and she was the only one who knew it. 2 winters later, on a cold morning before Christmas, Caleb came in from the barn, and he found Nora at the kitchen table with the cavalry book open in front of her and a letter from the mission women in town, asking her to come and speak to their Sunday school about the stewardship of animals. She said, "I am not sure they want me to speak. I think they want me to be an example of one who was rescued." He poured himself coffee. He sat across from her. He said, "You can do as you like. I will say this, child. The world is going to keep trying to put you in a box. The box will have a label on it, and the label will say something tidy, and the box will be smaller than you are. You will have to decide, every time, whether to fit in the box or to stand up in it. I would not fit in any box I ever saw." She smiled at him for the first time in a long while. She said, "That is because you are too honest to fit anywhere." He said, "That is because I am too stubborn." She said, "Call it what you like." He drank his coffee. He thought about how his wife would have laughed at this. He thought about his boy, who would have been taller than Nora by now, almost. He thought about Whiskey Jim, who had taught him the patience of the rope, and about all the people in the world who are never thanked for what they taught, because the thing they taught is a small thing, like a swing of a loop, and it does not get read about in books. He stood at the window and looked out at the dark. He said, "I would not have made it through this winter without you." She said, "You would have." He said, "Perhaps, but not in this shape." Next, we'll tell the story of a young widow who inherited a mountain stagecoach line that every man in the territory said could not be run by a woman, and the former outlaw she hired as her lead driver, who had once held up that same line at gunpoint. Good night, friends. Keep your coffee hot and your conscience cleaner.